March 7, 1945, Remagen, Germany. Cold mist clings to the Rhine River. The air is thick with smoke and the metallic echo of artillery in the distance. A thin morning light cuts through the haze, revealing the twisted skeleton of the Ludendorff Bridge, its steel arches scarred by months of retreat and destruction. On the western bank, American engineers and soldiers of the 9th Armored Division crouch low among shattered stones, their breath fogging the air, hands trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. Across the water, German observers can barely believe what they see, enemy troops advancing toward the river they were sure would hold them back. The Rhine, the last great barrier to the heart of Germany, was supposed to buy them time. But it isn't holding. Under relentless artillery fire, the engineers unroll cables, drive pilings and piece together steel panels with the rhythmic clang of hammers. Each strike echoes against the cliffs, a sound of defiance. By nightfall, the impossible begins to take shape, a bridge rising from ruin, built under fire, under pressure, under history itself. And as German gunners stare in disbelief from the far bank, they realize, the Americans are crossing the Rhine. By early 1945, Europe was a continent in collapse. The Allies had clawed their way across France, liberated Belgium, and shattered the remnants of Hitler's once mighty armies in the Ardennes. The Battle of the Bulge had failed. German hopes of halting the Allied advance in the West had been crushed beneath the weight of relentless American and British firepower. But one formidable natural obstacle still stood, the Rhine River. The Rhine was more than just a river. It was a symbol of Germany itself, a steel-gray serpent winding through the industrial heartland, separating the Allied armies from the final march to Berlin. It stretched nearly 800 miles from the Swiss Alps to the North Sea, lined with steep cliffs, towns, and fortified positions. In March 1945, every bridge across it had been destroyed, either by Allied bombers or by retreating German engineers under Hitler's scorched earth orders. To the German High Command, the Rhine was their last defensive line. To the Allies, it was the final gateway. Crossing it meant invasion. Conquering it meant ending the war. On the western bank, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied forces, was already planning Operation Plunder, a massive, coordinated river crossing by British and American forces scheduled for late March. But war is never bound by plans. In the fluid chaos of retreat and pursuit, opportunities appear suddenly, and vanish just as quickly. As February turned to March, the U.S. First Army, under General Courtney Hodges, pushed rapidly eastward. Its vanguard, the 9th Armored Division, commanded by Major General John W. Leonard, was advancing faster than even Allied planners anticipated. These were seasoned men, veterans of the Ardennes, battle-hardened and relentless. Their mission was to reach the Rhine and find a way across, no matter the cost. The German armies, meanwhile, were crumbling. The Wehrmacht was exhausted, understrength, and disorganized. Hitler's orders to defend every foot of German soil had turned strategic withdrawal into suicidal defiance. In towns along the Rhine, Cologne, Bonn, Remagen, commanders struggled to follow contradictory orders, hold the line, destroy the bridges, and prevent any Allied crossings. By the first week of March, German engineers had already destroyed nearly every usable crossing over the river. Only one major bridge still stood, the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen. Originally built during World War I, the Ludendorff was a massive steel structure spanning the Rhine between Remagen and Erpel. It was designed to support troop trains and heavy equipment, over 1,000 feet long, supported by stone towers and steel trusses. It had survived years of bombing, its frame blackened but intact. To the Germans, it was a last escape route for retreating divisions. To the Americans, if captured, it could become a miracle. On March 7, the men of the 9th Armored Division approached Remagen almost by accident. Their orders were to probe the river defenses, not to engage. What they found that morning would stun even their commanders. The bridge was still standing. No one could have predicted what would follow in the next 12 hours. A chain of events that would shake the German command and accelerate the end of the war in Europe. The Rhine had long been Germany's line of destiny. Now it was about to be breached. The discovery of the intact Ludendorff Bridge sent shockwaves through Allied command. When Major Karl Timmermann, leading a small task force from the 27th Armored Infantry Battalion, first caught sight of the structure through his binoculars, he could hardly believe it. Black smoke rose from the eastern bank, German soldiers running across the bridge in retreat. But the steel frame, against all logic, still stood. Timmermann radioed the news up the chain. "Bridge at Remagen intact," he reported. Those words raced through the field radios of the 9th Armored Division and soon reached higher command. For the first time, the Rhine, the final barrier to Nazi Germany, was open. At headquarters, General Leonard and General Hodges both faced the same dilemma: seize the moment or wait for orders. The official crossing operations were still weeks away. But hesitation meant losing the bridge. German engineers could destroy it at any moment. Every second mattered. The order was given: take the bridge. Meanwhile, the German defenders on the eastern bank, a patchwork of Wehrmacht troops, Volkssturm militia and railway engineers, were in chaos. Their commanding officer, Major Hans Scheller, had been ordered to destroy the bridge if the Americans approached. But demolition charges had been hastily placed and were short of proper detonators. Ammunition was low. Communications with higher command were collapsing. Across the river, American tanks and infantry assembled under the smoke of artillery and the drone of reconnaissance planes. The engineers, men from the 9th Armored Engineer Battalion, were already preparing bridging equipment, anticipating the worst. They had trained for months on the Bailey Bridge, a modular steel construction system capable of spanning rivers quickly. But they had never built one under this kind of fire. In every direction the war was closing in. To the north, Montgomery's British forces were preparing for their own massive crossing. To the south, Patton's Third Army was driving hard toward the Saar. And now, a small band of American soldiers stood before an opportunity that could change the entire course of the campaign. The Rhine had seemed untouchable, a natural fortress dividing victory from stalemate. Yet here at Remagen, destiny had left one door open. Within hours, that door would be forced wide, not by generals or grand plans, but by engineers and infantrymen who refused to stop moving forward. Every great moment in war reveals more than tactics and firepower. It exposes the human spirit, the decisions, the fear, the courage that define it. For the men of the 9th Armored Division, Remagen was not a planned assault. It was instinct, training, and raw determination colliding with chaos. Major Karl Timmerman, only 25 years old, was leading his battalion through the small town when his scouts stumbled upon the bridge. He immediately recognized what it meant, and what it could cost. Capturing it could shorten the war. But approaching it meant running straight into concentrated German fire. Timmerman's men were exhausted from days of fighting. They had advanced over 50 miles in less than a week, pushing through ambushes, minefields, and snipers. Now they stood before one of the most heavily defended river crossings in Europe. Yet hesitation wasn't in their vocabulary. When the order came down, take it before they blow it, they moved. The human cost was immediate. German machine guns opened from the towers. Mortar fire tore through the town. Tanks of the 14th Tank Battalion rolled into position, firing directly at the towers to suppress the defenders. Infantrymen sprinted toward the bridge under covering smoke. Men fell but the rest pressed on. At the center of it all were the engineers, combat-trained, yet burdened with the tools of builders, cables, planks, and explosives for defusing charges. They moved like ghosts through the smoke, cutting wires, crawling under girders, searching for detonators. Each second could be their last. Every cut wire might be the one that saved the bridge. The human angle of Remagen wasn't one of heroics and speeches. It was one of quiet, relentless endurance. The soldiers weren't fighting for glory. They were fighting to keep steel intact, to hold a structure that shouldn't have survived the war. And yet, by dusk, they had done the impossible. The Ludendorff Bridge was in American hands, still standing, still usable. The Rhine had been breached, not by an army but by a handful of men who refused to wait for orders. Behind the human bravery was something deeper, a triumph of engineering and tactical foresight. The Bailey Bridge, the unsung hero of Allied logistics, had revolutionized warfare. Invented by British engineer Donald Bailey, it was a modular bridge system that could be assembled quickly without heavy machinery. Made of prefabricated steel panels, it could carry tanks, trucks, and artillery across rivers in record time. The Americans had mastered its use, creating entire engineer battalions trained to build under fire. At Remagen those skills were tested like never before. As soon as the Ludendorff was captured, orders went out to construct supplementary bridges, floating pontoons and steel trusses, to reinforce the crossing. The Rhine's current was swift, nearly 8 miles per hour, and the banks were unstable from bombardment. Engineers drove piles into the mud, set pontoons and anchored cables, all while German artillery zeroed in on their position. The enemy reaction was immediate. Across the river, German field commanders were in shock. Reports of an intact bridge at Remagen reached Adolf Hitler himself, who erupted in fury. He dismissed General von Rundstedt, replaced him with Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, and ordered the destruction of the bridge at all costs. Special units were formed to bomb it, artillery, dive bombers, even V-2 rockets were redirected to annihilate the crossing. But the bridge held. Every failed German strike only fueled the resolve of the Americans working below it. They repaired damage faster than it could accumulate. When a section was hit, they replaced it within hours. When cables snapped, they retensioned them by hand. The men worked through darkness, exhaustion, and constant shellfire. It was not merely a military feat, it was an act of defiance, of builders standing firm against destruction. For the German command, the sight of American tanks crossing the Rhine was a psychological catastrophe. For the Allies, it was proof that nothing could halt their advance. And within 9 hours, the unthinkable became reality. A new bridge stood beside the old one, built under fire, under pressure, under history. The moment of decision came at 3 p.m. on March 7, 1945. The first American tanks rumbled across the Ludendorff Bridge. Each foot of steel beneath their treads groaned under the weight, trembling from both stress and distant explosions. Below, engineers clung to the trusses, inspecting joints, hammering pins, tightening bolts. German artillery from the eastern cliffs unleashed a storm of fire. Shells landed in the water, sending geysers skyward. The river churned with shrapnel. Major Timmerman led the crossing, followed by Sherman tanks and armored infantry. Smoke filled the arches, the air thick with the smell of oil and burning cordite. At one point, German engineers managed to detonate partial charges. A section of decking heaved upward, but the bridge refused to fall. The structure, battered and warped, held long enough for hundreds to cross. By nightfall, American forces had established a bridgehead on the eastern bank. Engineers immediately began reinforcing the structure, setting up pontoons and clearing mines. The crossing stunned the German command. The Rhine, once considered an impenetrable line, had been breached by a small, unplanned operation. Hitler's rage was volcanic. He ordered a court-martial of the officers responsible for failing to destroy the bridge. But no punishment could change what had happened. The Rhine had been crossed and the road to the heart of Germany lay open. The following days became a test of endurance unlike any in the war. German bombers attacked relentlessly. Dive bombers screamed down the river valley, their payloads striking the bridge and surrounding hills. The Americans responded with anti-aircraft fire, filling the sky with flak. Pontoon sections caught fire, repair crews were thrown into the water, yet work never stopped. On March 10, engineers began constructing a heavy pontoon bridge 400 yards downstream. Working in teams, they maneuvered massive floating platforms into place, bolting them together in the roaring current. The project lasted 9 hours, 9 hours of ceaseless labor under machine gun fire, shelling, and air raids. By nightfall, a new steel artery spanned the Rhine. The Germans, watching from across the water, could only stare in disbelief. The impossible had been done twice, once by seizing the Ludendorff Bridge and again by building another beside it. As American divisions poured across, their momentum became unstoppable. Tanks, artillery, trucks, and entire columns of infantry moved eastward. The crossing at Remagen had become a symbol of American ingenuity and a turning point of the war. Within weeks, Allied armies would surge deep into Germany, sealing the Reich's fate. For 9 days the Ludendorff Bridge endured, until March 17 when it finally collapsed into the Rhine, taking dozens of men with it. Yet by then it no longer mattered. The bridge had done its duty. The river had been conquered. The success at Remagen transformed the Allied campaign overnight. In less than 2 weeks, over 25,000 troops, 2,500 vehicles, and hundreds of tanks had crossed into Germany. The Rhine, once considered a fortress, was now a highway of invasion. For the Germans, the psychological blow was devastating. Hitler's fury boiled into paranoia. He blamed his officers, ordering executions of those who had failed to destroy the bridge. General Scheller and several others were court-martialed and shot. But punishment could not mask the truth. The Reich was collapsing from within. On the Allied side, engineers who had risked everything were hailed as heroes. Members of the 9th Armored Engineer Battalion received Distinguished Service Crosses, Silver Stars, and Bronze Stars for their actions. Major Karl Timmerman, the first officer to cross the Rhine, became a symbol of courage, the man who seized opportunity when it appeared. The tactical value was immense. The bridgehead at Remagen allowed the U.S. First Army to expand rapidly eastward, linking with other Allied formations. By mid-March, Patton's Third Army had crossed further south, and Montgomery's forces soon followed in the north. The German army, trapped between converging fronts, could no longer defend effectively. The war's end was now a matter of weeks, not months. The bridge that was supposed to stop an army had, instead, launched one. When the Ludendorff Bridge finally collapsed on March 17, 1945, the moment was both tragic and symbolic. After 9 days of bombardment, stress, and vibration, its central span gave way, plunging dozens of engineers into the Rhine. 28 men were killed, over 60 wounded. The river swallowed the wreckage, steel, timber, and blood blending into the current that had once divided nations. But the crossing lived on in legend. The engineers' 9-hour bridge, completed under relentless fire, became a case study in military engineering. The speed, discipline, and courage it required were unprecedented. Manuals and training films later cited Remagen as the textbook example of combat bridging, how adaptability could change the course of a war. For Germany, the fall of the Rhine barrier signaled the inevitable. Within 6 weeks, Allied forces were in Berlin's suburbs. Hitler was in his bunker. The war in Europe was in its final act. Even in defeat, some German officers admitted respect. They called it the miracle of Remagen. A feat so audacious, so unexpected that it defied logic. The Americans had not only crossed the Rhine, they had done so with courage forged in sweat, smoke, and steel. The bridge may have fallen, but its purpose had already been fulfilled. The crossing at Remagen stood as one of the last great moments of World War II, where the ingenuity of engineers changed the fate of nations. War is often remembered for its destruction. Cities reduced to rubble, lives extinguished by the millions. But sometimes, it is defined by creation, by what men build in the face of chaos. At Remagen, the engineers of the 9th Armored Division built more than a bridge. They built a path to victory. In 9 hours, under fire, under fear, they turned steel and determination into destiny. The crossing of the Rhine marked the moment when the war's end became inevitable. It was proof that courage and ingenuity could break even the most formidable barriers. Every rivet, every beam, every plank placed in those 9 hours carried not just soldiers, but the weight of a world longing for peace. The Germans called it a miracle. The Americans called it duty. History remembers it as both. And as the Rhine's waters flowed over the ruins of the Ludendorff Bridge, they carried with them the echoes of hammers and the voices of men who, for one night, refused to believe in the impossible.